They were the most expensive structures a medieval lord could build. Some took decades to complete. Some bankrupted entire kingdoms. They were designed to be impossible to take. Walls thick enough to absorb repeated battering. Towers positioned to cover every angle of attack. Water supplies hidden inside so no siege could starve them out. And yet they fell. Again and again, clever attackers found the one weakness every castle eventually had. This is the story of how medieval castles were built, how they were defended, and how the greatest arms race of the Middle Ages was fought not on open battlefields, but in stone, timber, and engineering ingenuity. The castle didn't begin in stone. That is the first thing most people get wrong. The earliest medieval castles were built almost entirely from timber and earth, fast to construct, cheap to build, and good enough to establish military control over newly conquered territory quickly. The motte-and-bailey design that spread across Europe following the Norman conquests of the 10th and 11th centuries was elegantly simple. A motte, a raised earthen mound, was topped with a wooden tower serving as the lord's residence and last line of defense. Below it sat the bailey, an enclosed courtyard surrounded by a wooden palisade housing the garrison, stables, kitchens, and workshops that kept the castle functioning. The whole thing could be constructed in weeks by a large enough labor force. They were effective, but deeply vulnerable to fire. A single flaming arrow landing in the right place could turn years of construction to ash overnight. As Norman lords consolidated their conquests and accumulated enough wealth and time, the logical answer was to rebuild in stone. The Great Stone Keep, the donjon, became the defining image of medieval military architecture through the 11th and 12th centuries. The White Tower of London, begun by William the Conqueror around 1078, is perhaps the most famous surviving example. A massive rectangular stone tower with walls up to 15 feet thick at the base, designed to be impervious to any contemporary weapon and visible for miles across the landscape as a permanent statement of Norman dominance. Building these structures was an undertaking of staggering complexity and cost. A major castle project required an army of specialists, master masons who designed and directed the construction, quarrymen who cut and dressed the stone, blacksmiths who produced the iron tools that made the stonework possible, carpenters, roofers, glaziers, and the vast unskilled labor force that moved materials by hand and cart across whatever terrain the site demanded. Stone was the critical resource, and transporting it was often the single greatest logistical challenge of any castle project. Wherever possible, builders quarried stone on site or as close as possible. When that wasn't an option, stone traveled by river barge, ox cart, and human muscle across distances that make the finished product even more remarkable. The site itself was chosen with military precision. Height was paramount. A castle on elevated ground forced attackers to fight uphill, extended the visual range of defenders, and made direct assault dramatically more costly. Water was essential. A reliable internal water source meant a castle could endure a siege of months or years without surrender. Natural defensibility mattered enormously. Rocky outcroppings, river bends, cliff edges were exploited wherever available, allowing the landscape itself to serve as part of the defensive system. Croc de Chevalier in Syria, considered by many historians the finest crusader castle ever built, combined all of these elements so effectively that it withstood sieges repeatedly across nearly 2 centuries of continuous occupation. Castle design evolved constantly in direct response to the weapons being used against it, a genuine arms race in stone and steel running across the entire medieval period. Early rectangular keeps had a critical weakness: their corners. A technique called mining involved attackers tunneling beneath the corner, propping the tunnel with wooden supports, then burning the supports to collapse the tunnel and bring down the corner above it. The solution was the circular tower. With no corners to undermine, it distributed stress more effectively and offered no flat faces for mining operations to target. By the 13th century, round towers had largely replaced rectangular ones throughout advanced military architecture. The concentric castle, Multiple rings of defensive walls, each higher than the one before it, represented the most sophisticated evolution of medieval military design. Edward I of England, returning from the Crusades with direct exposure to the most advanced military architecture in the world, applied those lessons in his extraordinary castle-building campaign across Wales in the late 13th century. Castles like Beaumaris, Harlech, and Conway were designed so that an attacker who breached the outer wall found themselves trapped between two walls, exposed to fire from the higher inner defenses with nowhere to shelter. Taking the outer wall was not a victory, it was a death trap. Defending a castle under siege was both a science and an endurance test. The gatehouse, the most vulnerable point of any castle, evolved into an elaborate killing zone of its own. Portcullises, heavy iron-reinforced grills that dropped vertically to block the gate passage, were often doubled, two portcullises with a short passage between them, creating a trapped space where attackers who broke through the first gate could be isolated and destroyed from murder holes, openings in the ceiling through which defenders dropped stones, poured boiling water, or fired arrows directly downward onto anyone below. The walls themselves were designed for active defense, not passive resistance. Battlements, the alternating raised merlons and open crenels that give castle walls their distinctive silhouette, allowed defenders to shelter behind stone while shooting through the gaps. Arrowslits, narrow vertical openings splayed inward to give archers a wide field of fire while presenting almost no target from outside, were positioned to cover every angle of the walls and approaches. Projecting towers placed at intervals along the curtain wall allowed defenders to fire along the wall face itself, eliminating the blind spot directly beneath the wall where attackers could shelter from above. Attackers developed increasingly sophisticated countermeasures for every defensive innovation. The trebuchet, a counterweight siege engine capable of hurling stones weighing up to 150 kilograms with devastating accuracy, could batter walls that would have laughed off earlier siege equipment. Mining remained the most feared technique throughout the period. Siege towers allowed attackers to attempt to match the height advantage of defenders, but all of these required time, and time was always the castle's greatest ally. A well-supplied garrison could hold for months or years, waiting for a relief army, a negotiated settlement, or simple attrition to end the siege in their favor. In the end, what brought the age of the castle to a close wasn't a smarter attacker or a better siege technique, it was gunpowder. The introduction of effective cannon in the 14th and 15th centuries changed the fundamental equation of castle defense overnight. Stone walls thick enough to absorb battering rams and trebuchet stones crumbled under sustained artillery fire. The high walls that gave medieval defenders their greatest advantage became liabilities, tall targets that collapsed inward catastrophically when their bases were breached. Military architecture reinvented itself, lower, wider, earthen-fronted fortifications designed to absorb cannon fire rather than resist it. The great stone castle, centuries in the making, became obsolete within a generation. But the castles remained, standing on their hills, their stones still fitted together with a precision that has outlasted the kingdoms that built them. Walk inside one today, and the walls still tell the story of every decision their builders made: where to place a tower, how wide to cut an arrow slit, how deep to sink the foundations into the rock. Every stone was placed by someone who understood exactly what it needed to withstand.